Hey everybody, welcome in. It is a Thursday. Combine workout starts today. Combine's been buzzing all week long. This is the Utopia Football Podcast. It's great to be with you. I'm Sean Pendergast, one half of Payne and Pendergast, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on mornings on Sports Radio 610. And I am pleased to be joined right now by one of my very best friends in the business. Does a phenomenal job covering the Houston Texans. And if you're watching on the video stream, you can probably tell he is live at the Combine in Indianapolis. My man Cody Stutes is joining me on the Utopia Football Podcast today to break down some Combine and some of the things going on with the Texans in free agency. Cody, how's Indy treating you, brother?
It's been awesome. I mean, the draft is one of my favorite things on the NFL calendar. And I got to go to the Combine in 2019, and I haven't been able to be back since. So to be back, talk to the prospects, just the buzz, who you see, and who they're talking to. It's just so much fun. The Combine is so great. It's one of the only events where the entire NFL descends on one city. And so it's a really unique and fun thing.
At a perfect time of the year for it to happen, too, because obviously we got free agency coming up. There's decisions to be made with franchise tags. You and I are going to talk in a minute here about Nick Caserio's press conference yesterday as we record here on a Thursday. I guess just in general, I mean, you don't really have anything to compare it to because, as you mentioned, the last time you were at the Combine was in 2019, which was a completely different generation of Texans football. So tough to compare it to, say, like last year for you. But I guess just in general, like what's your feel on the buzz around the Texans as you get around people that are outside of Houston in one place right now?
I'm so surprised at how a lot of other people view the Texans. And the one thing that I heard the most the first night, just talking to different people who cover other teams, was, hey, do they have enough at wide receiver? Are those wide receivers any good? And I was like, any good? Like, did we not watch Nico Collins be one of the 12 best wide receivers in football this year? Like, Tank Dell was one of the best rookie wide receivers before he got injured. And so I was really surprised by that conversation. And then again, multiple people were like, hey, man, they really got to go get Mike Evans. I was like, I don't think you really understand what they've got going on from an offensive standpoint. That was kind of the weird sentiment. One person even advocated for trading for T. Higgins, and I was like, I don't think you have a good grasp on football.
Okay.
And then, but I was really intrigued by the thought process of a couple different people where they said, hey, the Texans, CJ's awesome. They were really good last year. They got a bunch of cap space. Is this a push all the chips in the middle of the table offseason? Is this a go all in offseason with how many different players are available in free agency that are pretty interesting? And it's something that I don't believe they believe in, the Texans themselves, but you can push a lot of chips on the table and still actually have a lot of chips. I think the Bears are the perfect example. They spent big in free agency last year. They're one of the top teams with cap space again this year. And, they spent big thinking they had their rookie quarterback. They maybe didn't and maybe don't. The Texans do have their rookie quarterback. So you can make a big investment and still have the ability to make another big investment the following year too.
Yeah. Cody Stutes. I should mention, Cody, Houston football. Mm-hmm. I got to mention this, www.houfootball.com.
This is the site I use. It will not show up if you don't put the www. So I feel like I'm in 1997.
Yeah. I feel like you need to get in. I know you're in your beginning stages. You're one season in to building the empire you're eventually going to have at Houston football. But you might want to hire an IT guy to see if they can do something about that www thing.
Yeah, for sure. I just tell the people, throw Cody Stutes Houston football in your Google machine and you'll find it.
And it's great. And Cody sends out the emails. He's got the Substack video, everything. Does a phenomenal job covering the Houston Texans. He's live at the Combine. All right, so actually what you just talked about, Cody, is a good segue into what I wanted to start in with you, because Nick Caserio met with the media on Wednesday. And I thought not nearly as nugget-friendly as D'Amico Ryans is. I feel like D'Amico gives more to the media than Nick does. We're a year in on this thing now, so I think we're just kind of used to that. But I thought Nick was surprisingly candid in the answer to a question that you actually asked him about the franchise. The question was about the franchise tag. And I think there was some stuff there that may be hinting with the franchise tag, which we'll get to in just a second. But I thought the sweet nectar of that answer was kind of a sidebar that he went into where he talked about two things. One, kind of conveying that they could be conservative, the Texans could, with the cap space. And when I say conservative, that they're mindful of being able to carry cap space over into next season. which I think a lot of people who want them to be aggressive probably didn't like at least hearing that. I mean, that's what they're going to do. The big thing was Nick volunteering the name Nico Collins, saying, I know you guys are going to ask me about Nico. And that was within the context of looking at guys to possibly extend down the road. So perfect segue off of what you said, which is you and I are in agreement on Nico Collins. I think he's one of the ascending, really good, and could be one of the best receivers in football potentially. What was your reaction to the Nico Collins part of Nick's answer there?
So, he literally just brought Nico Collins up without being asked about him.
Never does that. Never does that.
And it's, I almost wonder just the way he talked about it. And he met with local media after the podium and talked a little bit more. And he said, look, we have been open that we'll do a contract whenever we need to do a contract. If it's before free agency, if it's during free agency, if it's after the draft, if it's in the summer, if it's in training camp. Titus Howard last year is a perfect example of training camp. He's like, we will do a contract when we need to do a contract. And him bringing up Nico Collins, saying that, I almost wonder if there's going to be at least one, maybe a few offers on the table for Nico Collins to take. Now, if I'm Nico Collins, I say no thank you, and I play another year. I hopefully am awesome, and then maybe I get franchise tagged, and then after that, I'm probably making $25-30 million a year because the cap's going to go up a little bit more over the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. But Nico Collins has made less than $4 million in the NFL so far. And that's nothing to sneeze about for, regular folk. But when it comes to NFL and top flight wide receivers, that's a pretty low number. So when a guy shows up and maybe it's a $16 to $20 million contract a year, it'd be hard to say no if you're Nico Collins.
Sure.
And for the Texans to know that Nico Collins and Tank Dell are for sure going to be in the building together for the next few seasons, I think that gives you a tremendous amount of peace of mind. If you're Nick Caserio, D'Amico Ryans, and look, you and I both know this, the offense is going to change from who's on the headset and who's talking to the quarterback.
Eventually, not this season, but eventually.
Yeah,
it will. Yeah.
Like CJ's not going anywhere. If you lock in Nico, he's not going anywhere. Same with Tank and the line for the most part. But Bobby Slowick's probably got 1 year. If Gerard Johnson's awesome, and after he takes over for Bobby Slowick, he's probably got 1 year. So it's the less you change the players, the easier it is when something changes with the coaches.
Yeah. What do you think? I know you play this game just like I do. Okay, what's the number? What does an extension look like that you think that would be good for both sides? Not without getting too deep into guaranteed money and this and that, avoidable year, just in general, years and total value. What do you feel like is a number where you think it's hard for either side to say no to?
I would think when you get in the mid-teens, early to mid-teens, it's early teens is incredible for the Texans. The potential for him to be even a top 20 guy. When you think about how important the wide receiver position is, if he's a top 20 guy in the early teens from an average annual value, that's a really good spot to be in. Mid-teens, 15, 16, and again, and the first part of that answer, when Caserio talked about the franchise tag, was kind of about the money and how hey, the tag, it hits your cap right away. Just because Nico Collins makes $16 million a year doesn't mean it's $16 million a year every year on the cap.
Mm-hmm.
So you can manipulate it, spread it out. Hopefully you're extending him at the end of that contract because he's been really good. So it's not – I don't think it's the 20s because the team needs to have some sort of protection from a guy that was hurt for the first 2 years of his career.
Yeah.
But the teens, as far as the millions go, I feel really comfortable with most of those numbers. Now you get to 19, 18, maybe it's a little uncomfortable. But again, he turns into a top 10 wide receiver. Those guys make $30 million now.
Yeah.
If he's making 18 and he's a top 10 guy, that's incredible.
I 18. I feel like I would do that deal if I were the Houston Texans. I think if it's 18, I think it's more likely Nico says, well, I'll see what happens. I'll play with CJ Stroud another year and go get me another 1,300 yards and then see what happens. It should be fascinating to watch play out over the next several weeks with Nico, especially given the fact that Nick volunteered that yesterday in response to your question. So great job there by you. All right, so let's I guess before we segue into free agency, was there anything else that jumped out at you about what Caserio said yesterday? Any other nuggets other than the Nico thing and kind of how they might approach free agency?
love the I love the franchise tag conversation.
Yeah.
Don't love the idea they're going to use it. I mean, even with Dalton Schultz, it doesn't feel like maybe they're interested in using that, because he talked about, hey, it hits your cap. We have the financial flexibility, but it doesn't allow you, like, if you don't have to stick that $12 million, which is what it would be for Dalton Schultz, on the cap, don't stick it on the cap. And I felt like what Nick Caserio did is he established that the Houston Texans, with what, sixth most salary cap space in football, they will not be an ATM for people to come see. They like it as much as it was like, hey, let's be realistic with our money. It was also, we're not going to go be an ATM for all these free agents. You're not going to come here and get a bunch of money from us because you think we need a defensive tackle or a corner or an end or something like that. And he stressed multiple times that they have a lot of free agents, some of the most in the NFL. And so I do think DeMeco Ryans was more effusive in his praise of current free agents that have played for the Texans.
Very much.
Nick Caserio was a bit more analytical when he talked about that. He's like, look, we know the most about our own guys, but you have to weigh what we know versus a prediction or an expectation of a free agent. And then really what you weigh is kind of what he said is upgrades. Is this guy an upgrade, even though we don't know as much about him?
All right, so let's transition over to that. Let's talk about free agency a little bit, and then we'll get to some of the things that you're seeing and looking forward to seeing at the Combine. Cody Stutes, Houston Football, joining me on the Utopia Football podcast. So let's start with what you were just talking about. Texans inside the building there. Is there anything DeMeco or Nick said over the last couple of days, or anything that you are, buzz that you're hearing around certain guys that have affected, I'll say, your handicap on the odds of certain guys coming back here? Do you feel like after listening to DeMeco and Nick talk, and then just hearing the normal rumor mill and things like that, that maybe there's more Texans that are getting ready to come back to the team than we thought, or fewer? How are you feeling right now about the guys that were on the Texans last year? Not all of them, but just we know who the main players are in all this, the 5 or 6 guys who are on who are free agents now. What's your general feel on the Texans' own free agents right now?
I'll take the cheese from DeMeco Ryans and even Nick Caserio on Devin Singletary. And I understand maybe that's very clearly sending a message to the free agent running back, say, hey, we like Devin Singletary, we're comfortable with him. But when DeMeco Ryans spends 30 seconds total talking about Jonathan Grenard and Dalton Schultz combined, and then he spends nearly 45 seconds talking about how much he loved Devin Singletary, I don't think that's without reason. And with certainly an understanding of, hey, they could bring back Devin Singletary, who had his most rushing yards in a season with this team, went over 1,000 total scrimmage yards with this team. They could bring him back, add to the running back room with something else, and they'd be within very much a realm of being successful with the running back. I've talked to a few people that don't believe that Steven Nelson's going to find the market that he thinks is going to develop for him. The age and being injured at the end of the season has worked against him in sort of the evaluation of what he can do. So I don't believe Steven Nelson will be back. That's not based on anything that Caserio or DeMeco Ryans said. I don't believe he'll be back, and that is a strong sentiment amongst people here in Indianapolis that Steven Nelson's not going to be back on the Texans. Now, it's not a great free agent cornerback market, so if something doesn't develop, somebody doesn't show up, then maybe you feel comfortable bringing back Steven Nelson. The Grenard conversation is interesting. There's a lot of guys from other teams that really like him. I heard the Bears kind of were a team that might be interested, just spend a bunch of money and have 2 young monsters at the end with Sweat and Jonathan Grenard. So that's a really interesting one. I think Blake Cashman's a situation where if it fits, they'll bring him back. Nick Caserio kind of slid in just a comment about him where if he's back, he has a role. And he's a guy that the role has increased every year with the team. Some pretty good free agent linebackers. So it's kind of take it or leave it with Blake Cashman. I would think. I don't think it's one of those have to have it situations with him. And then really, if they like a guy from a depth perspective, they would do well to keep that guy in the building and be comfortable with him as a depth player versus, bringing in a new veteran that they don't know about. So I do get that sentiment that, hey, maybe some of these depth pieces could be back, whereas some of these previous starters might be swapped out for upgrades.
Yeah, it is funny, Cody, because like you all those guys you name, I was just reading an article before you and I got on the air about Alex Bregman and he'll probably be a free agent next year. And I was talking about the Astros and how they just let guys walk in free agency, but there always seems to be some sort of solution internally to backfill that. And Pena with Correa and Garrett Cole leaves, and all these pitchers and this and that. And obviously, players we're talking about are not at the level Bregman is as a player of the Astros. These are all sort of, middle to upper tier, middle to like average to slight above average guys. But all the guys you're rattling off, like there really is no internal solution. Like this is still not a deep football. Like Blake Cashman leaves, and now you're putting Henry Toa in there. Steven Nelson leaves. Your next corner is D'Angelo Ross, or Kadar Holman or somebody like that. Dalton Schultz leaves, and now it's the Brevin Jordan Tegan Catoriano show. That's no good. So right. I mean, it's not horrible, but it's like it's not ideal. Yeah. So you're there. If these guys walk in, I think it really their struggle. It may be a struggle to find guys to backfill, and it certainly impacts that 23rd overall pick as well.
Yeah, no doubt. How free agency works, and I actually had somebody tell me that even if they made some successful moves in free agency from a defensive line perspective, they might still use defensive line as sort of the priority at that 23rd overall pick. But there's a lot of different ways they can go with 23 because you may get some really good players pushed down the board because of positions the Texans maybe won't address or wouldn't be in a position to address. And so they push, some good players that you do want or need down the board as well.
So before we get to stuff going on at the combine, as long as we're talking about free agency, where are you on the running back position? I mean, you just talked about where you think things could go with Devin Singletary, but I'm just talking about your opinion, I guess, here, because Saquon Barkley has been a very polarizing figure amongst the free agency chatter. Derrick Henry's name has certainly been one that's been front and center. Josh Jacobs as well. Where are you on what you think Texans should do in terms of attacking veteran free agent running back market?
I'm a Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley guy. I'd like the big investment, and with Saquon, I would hope that the backup investment's a little bit larger than say Josh Jacobs. Jacobs is a couple of years removed from being the scrimmage leader in the NFL. He's played a lot of football. Barkley had the injury situation in 2020. He's missed a couple of games here or there. I always look at Barkley and say, well, he's played more games in the past 3 seasons than Christian McCaffrey has. Now, obviously, McCaffrey's been in the playoffs, while Saquon and the Giants have usually been sitting at home. But I want that to be a dynamic position. And if they don't go with one of the big names, I'd like a dual investment: Devin Singletary and DeAndre Swift and. But that is a position, and with an extra $10 million that showed up on the salary cap, and Nick Caserio kind of poo-pooed that like it wasn't a big deal.
He didn't get excited about it, did he?
No, with an extra $10 million, it feels like if you want to be a little bit extra, you want to get 2 appetizers instead of 1 appetizer at the restaurant. Okay, you've got the money to do that.
Yeah. Where are you on Derrick Henry? I'm curious.
You know what that $10 million is? That's a running back gift card. That's what that $10 million was. Running back gift card. That is a Landry's. That is you know what? We can go. I think we might be able to go to Vic and Anthony's tonight instead of Grotto. Yeah.
You
asked about Derrick Henry.
Where are you on Henry?
I feel like he'd be awesome for this team. I just worry that he is an outlier, and then he's also an outlier. Like, he's an outlier in that he's a unique guy that basically has never carried, like, nobody's ever really carried the ball this much this early in their career. And then by the same token, like, nobody's been this durable. Well, okay, it would tell you that he's ready to not be durable from that standpoint. I mean, I was looking at it the other day. I looked at the top rushers all time, and Emmitt Smith in his entire career led the league in carries 3 times. Derrick Henry has led the league in carries 4 times already. Yeah. And I'm like, how does that guy survive at the NFL level so long? And I just worry that if you make that investment and you don't have a good backup, you've sunk maybe your running back room to an extent.
Sure. I guess the question is, what's the investment, right? Like with any of these free agents, it's hard to have like a substantive conversation, like a truly substantive one without knowing like how many years, how much money, how much guaranteed. Like if Derrick Henry, like I see projections for him, like 1 year, $6 million or something like, I think it's going to be more than that. But like, if it's a 1 year deal that's not hamstringing you at all. My answer to that, it's Cody, and we're going to get to the combine here in a second. To anything about Henry and him being an outlier, and boy, the other shoe's going to drop at some point. Like, how is this happening? My answer is always look at the guy. It's not just that he's an outlier that he's made it this far carrying the football that much. Like he's an outlier. Like just use your eyes and look at the guy. Like holy crap, built in a lab.
Yeah, he does like cartoon workouts. Like, when Bugs Bunny would like work out to like fight somebody, like that's what Derrick Henry does in real life. It's like, it's incredible.
That's great. All right. So let's get to the combine. So you're there. And we've talked about the press conferences. Before we get into like specific prospects for the Texans that you're going to be keeping an eye on while you're there, what's been the buzziest topic there at the combine, whether it's draft related or just maybe, free agency related? And my guess is, I know a big one that's probably got both of them involved, but what's been the buzziest topic there?
So from a combine perspective, there's so many people that like these offensive linemen, and I just walk away when they start talking about them. Like I'm sure it's a great offensive line class. I'm not watching them. Okay. No. Somebody asked me, Cody, do you care about the offensive line? I don't. Quit asking. Let me do my best Nick Saban on that. So it's a really good offensive line class, and so they're going to push some good players down. Like 5 offensive linemen go in the first round, and 5 could go in the top 20. There's a bunch of freaky dudes,
which is great for the Texans, by the way, right? Yes, they're not in the market for any of them. Push those other players down the board.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's the wide receivers are disgusting this year. Like there's so many good ones. There's 3 guys that on any given year could have been the top wide receiver. Obviously Marvin Harrison Jr., but Malik Neighbors from LSU, Roma Dunze from Washington. Any of those guys could have been the number 1 wide receiver. Now the Texans aren't going to get a shot at those guys because top 10, they're probably all gone. But Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU, Adonai Mitchell from Texas, who is people just believe he's going to absolutely light up the combine workouts and just be an absolute monster. Troy Franklin from Oregon, Ladd McConkey, who is, to me, is Georgia wide receiver, 6-foot white guy. And my comparison for him is going to sound so strange when I say this. He's this year's Tank Dell.
I was just going to say, that's what it sounds like. Yeah.
He's this year's Tank Dell because people have shoehorned him into being a slot wide receiver. And I'm telling you, watching him at the Senior Bowl and talking to people here, Ladd McConkey can run every single route just like Tank Dell does. Now, Dell gets open on quickness. McConkey gets open a little bit more on technique and being a technician. But to me, they're the same dude. And I'm like really interested to watch how all these wide receivers play out. Roman Wilson from Michigan is another guy. Yeah. He's like Will Fuller-esque in that he'll just run by somebody. But maybe he's got a little bit more short route ability. Like wide receivers are really good. And then look, there's obviously a lot of chatter about these quarterbacks. But again, I just walk away and laugh actually when people start talking about quarterbacks. I was talking to a buddy of mine who covers the Broncos. I was like, you guys are talking to all these quarterbacks, huh? He's like, yep. I was like, how you feel about him? He's like, not good.
And they're picking 12. Like they're not even in position to get a good one right now, or one that's thought to be in there. They're not in position to get one of the top ones right now.
I was like, good. I was like, who's your favorite? He's like, Drake May. I was like, well, you're not getting him. He's like, he's like, we're hoping. I was like, well, okay.
Yeah. Keep rubbing those rosary beads, buddy. That's good. The sense I get coming from the combine is that if there were one big topic floating around out there that people were talking about over at St. Elmo's Steakhouse, walking around the combine, it feels like something's about to happen with Chicago, with either deciding to go Caleb Williams or Justin Fields here. Especially considering Caleb Williams is he's tops out of all these guys that are being talked about at the combine.
Yeah, I feel like the comments that the Bears have made, including Matt Eberflus saying, Well, we'll let Justin know when the decision's been made. Oh, okay. Well, then he's gone. See ya.
It's the decision's been made. Yeah, you just let know.
Yeah, see ya. Exactly.
Yeah. So before I let you go, on the defensive side of the ball, are there guys that you're going to, because I know defensive linebackers are doing their stuff today. We know D'Amico talks extensively about the defensive line, and we know he was a lineman. We know he's got a front seven fetish. D'Amico Ryans does. And now, Steven Nelson walks. I think corner is in play at 23. I think any level of the defense is in play. That 23rd overall pick. What say you with a combine slant to this whole thing?
Yeah, the D-line room's really top heavy. I don't think there's much depth in this year's class. And then even the top of it is not anywhere close to, say, Will Anderson. Like, he'd clearly be the best defensive lineman here, which kind of adds to, hey, good job trading up for him.
Getting them last year. Yeah. Yep.
They've talked to some defensive ends that I did not expect them to talk to. Braylon Trice is a guy from Washington who's sort of a fringe first round, second round type of guy. And I don't know that I necessarily expected them to talk to him, but I guess if they're projecting it, you can kind of see it. Byron Murphy from Texas, 3 people said, yeah, he's perfect for the Texans. And then as they said that, somebody standing next to him goes, he ain't getting to the Texans. And it's like, all right, well, that's fair.
He's not afraid to move up. I'm not saying make a Will Anderson move up, but I've said throughout the last few weeks, like certain guys, if they get into that teen range, Brock Bowers is one of them. We didn't talk about him, but can you imagine Brock Bowers out there with Tank and Nico doing their thing? Like if he's just 15 or 16 and Nick starts making phone calls, but not to get distracted, but Byron Murphy, same thing. I saw somebody, I think it was Bucky Brooks, had him getting to the Texans at 23, but you're hearing no chance. No chance.
I'm hearing no chance on that. Darius Robinson is a guy that I've sort of focused on since the Senior Bowl. Missouri defensive lineman, played a lot of defensive tackle for Missouri, but is best suited for a wide 9 defense, which talked to him at the Senior Bowl. He's like, oh, I want to play for the Texans. He's like, I like that style of defense. That's what I want to do at the next level. Really smart and really confident. Talked a lot about pass rush moves and scheme and stuff like that when he's at the podium at the combine. And then was also like, I think I'm the best defensive lineman coming out of this class, but I know none of that matters because when I get to the NFL, I got to start over. And I'm just like, okay, I love the mentality. Chop Robinson, Penn State defensive lineman. Yeah. The stats are putrid. I think he has 7.5 sacks in a couple of seasons with Penn State. But every Penn State defender talks about Chop is awesome, and he's a freak, and he's going to test really well. And so that's a guy that has a wide range. I've seen him as high as the teens. I've seen him as low as the 40s. But the Texans met with him yesterday. That's what he said. He was going to meet with the Texans yesterday. And then they talked to some linebackers too. Peyton Wilson, who's the top linebacker in this draft, to me, super freaky athlete. A lot of injury history. Had a shoulder injury end of year, had a knee injury end of year, stayed healthy, was one of the best players in college football last year. Loved the Texans. Said he had a great conversation with the Texans. Loved talking to D'Amico Ryans. And then they talked to just a couple of different linebackers, varying levels. And again, depth, if you're thinking mid-late rounds, guys that, hey, Henry To'o moves up a little bit, then there's a new Henry To'o type play.
Yeah.
Maybe a physically impressive guy, but really smart. Eichenberg, the linebacker from Ohio State, is another one. And before we run out of time, I got to get to this here for you.
Yeah.
Cade Stover, the tight end from Ohio State. I thought he was going to – he's got a great demeanor, very business, very hard-nosed, good old-fashioned country boy. I thought he was going to get emotional talking about C.J. Stroud. He was like, I love him. He's like, I would love to play with him. And I was just like, oh, go get him. Go get him.
Yeah. What's he considered? Like day two pick, Cade Stover?
A lot of people consider him the 3rd tight end, which would be a day 2 pick. Has talked to the Texans, which I found interesting because Jatavian Sanders, widely thought to be the 2nd tight end, has not talked to the Texans yet.
Okay.
So Stover and C.J. Stroud doing Buckeye things again. I mean, you could do a lot worse.
I'm down, and that may be position of need for the Texans, depending on how the Schultz thing plays out. Cody, you're the best man. I know you got other media commitments you got to go make right now, so go do your thing, man. Appreciate you. www.houfootball.com. I'm serious, people. You're hearing this. You got to put the www in front. He needs them 3 W's in front of that, or else it doesn't get the hits, right, Cody?
Exactly. Just Cody Stutes Houston Football in your Google machine. You'll find
Google it. Put it in the Google machine. Yeah, put Cody Stutes Houston Football and subscribe and consume all of Cody's content. Cody, great stuff from the Combine all week. I've been listening to you and following it. You're doing awesome, and I appreciate you jumping on with me, man.
Absolutely, man. Sean, anytime.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That's Cody Stutes. All right, let's get all of you what you need in terms of we got a mailbag episode coming up on Tuesday. So go ahead and if you want to send us an email, you can see if you're watching on the stream right there at the bottom, houmailbag@gmail.com. You can send your emails in. This is a great time of year to send emails in because this is the fun time. This is a time where we can fantasize a little bit about what the Texans could do in free agency in the draft. houmailbag@gmail.com. I will also encourage all of you to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. If you're just getting the podcast, this one like one-off, you saw that Cody was on and you want to listen to it, but you want to subscribe. We do an episode every Tuesday. That's the mailbag episode. We do an episode every Thursday. That is a guest episode throughout the offseason here. So tell a friend, subscribe, rate, review. All of it is really, really good for the Utopia Football Podcast. We appreciate that. Thanks to Anthony Irwin, my producer, for getting us all set up and getting the podcast out to all of you. Big thanks to all of you for continuing to listen and subscribe to the Utopia Football Podcast. Should be a great offseason for the Houston Texans. We'll be back on Tuesday. So I'm John Pendergast, Payne and Pendergast, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Sports Radio 610. Download the Odyssey app. You can hear that in this podcast on the Odyssey app. Until next Tuesday, have a great weekend, everybody.